Almost. Major. Holy fucking shit, this is major!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Almost Major, where we talk about the many major studios and the films they released. Today we are talking about American Psycho from 2000. My name is Kevin Tudor. I'm here with Bryden Doyle.
Hello.
And Charlie Nash.
Hello.
And we have a super special guest, filmmaker Cait Brasel is here. How are you?
Hello. Thank you. I'm great. How are you?
We're good. We just wanted to give you a second to plug any of your past or future projects that you're working on.
Oh boy. Oh man. I'm currently writing something that I'm planning on shooting during Oklahoma's dry spell. I also work crews, so a lot of my time is spent doing that, but I've got a couple of months off and I'm hoping to knock one out.
Hell yeah.
Not gonna mention it right now in terms of working title because I know it'll probably change 5 times.
Right.
So yeah, I got that. And then my partner John Shahan and I, he directed a movie a couple years back called Wait, just at the end of COVID, 2020, crazy times. That is just about ready for release as well. And then yeah, I've done a number of short films and all kinds of little things over the years. So yeah.
Hell yeah. And we recently had somebody drop out, and you are hosting the film screening of American Psycho this month. So it was a perfect idea to have you on for this. So thank you for dropping in really quick to give us a good guest.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Like I said, we were talking about American Psycho from 2000. This opened on April 14th, 2000 at number 7 in 1,236 theaters. Budget of $7 million, open weekend of $4.9 million, domestic gross of $15 million, and overall gross of $34 million. Top 5 films this weekend. Nope, I've only seen 2. Is Rules of Engagement, 28 Days, Keeping the Faith, Aaron Brockovich, and The Road to El Dorado.
Which are the 2 you've seen?
28 Days and Aaron Brockovich.
Yeah.
I've seen Road to El Dorado, but in class. So
yeah, 28 Days and Aaron Brockovich, both written by Susanna Grant, which is funny to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
I watched 28 Days in health class, oddly enough.
It's about alcoholism. As they were just like, this is health enough, I guess. Yeah,
pretty much. That's basically all the logic that my teacher put into it. Yeah.
It's not bad. It's very smarmy and whatnot, and very overly dramatic. But I mean, Sandra Bullock's really good in it. So
doesn't she completely ruin a wedding at the beginning? She drives drunk.
She drives a car into the house.
Oh yeah.
So
that's most of what I remember about that movie. I might have been asleep for chunks of it because I did not sleep in high school. So
what were some other health class movies?
I don't remember many in health class. I did watch Mean Girls in my psychology class, which was weird. And then they were like, it's through, and think about it through analyzing the clicks and stuff. And I was like, isn't that sociology? I don't think that's really psychology.
I'm hungover. Watch a movie, please.
Yeah, kind
of. Rules of Engagement. That's the Freakin' movie.
Yeah, where Sam Jackson has the line, yeah, I said it, wasted motherfuckers, or whatever. She commits a war crime. I have not seen it, but that's the clip I've seen in montages and stuff.
I love Friedkin, but I've heard that's not one of his better pieces of work.
And then Keeping the Faith, that's the Ed Norton directed one, which I still haven't seen.
As a motherless Brooklyn fan, I need to see that movie.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, he did direct that. That's right. Number 1 song in the U.S. this week is Maria Maria by Santana, and number 1 song in Canada this week is Never Let You Go by Third Eye Blind. Canada
wins. Boy.
Yeah, they kind of win. American Psycho follows a wealthy New York City investment banking executive, Patrick Bateman, who hides his alternative psychopathic ego from his coworkers and friends as he delves deeper into his violent, hedonistic fantasies. That's maybe one of the best write-ups we've gotten from Google, but directed and co-written by Mary Herron. Prior to this, I Shot Andy Warhol in 1996. After this, The Notorious Betty Page in 2005, Charlie Says in 2018. It's also co-written by Genevieve Turner, has co-written other scripts with Herron, Betty Page, Charlie Says, and also wrote Blood Rain in 2005.
Ooh, by our almost a major alum Uwe Boll.
Also, I hate to be this person, but it's Guinevere Turner, right? Not Genevieve.
I think God damn it! I keep going back and forth even after I listen to her commentary. It's
Guinevere Turner.
Guinevere. Okay. Ginny Turns, that's her name. Of course, adapted from the book by Bret Easton Ellis, starring Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman. Prior to this, Empire of the Sun in 1987, Little Women in 1994, and Velvet Goldmine in 1998, which I still need to watch. And after this,
so good.
I know. And after this, also featuring. There's really no like. I was like, who's like I think the second build person is Jared Leto, but I that's like barely second build.
Bill Sage. Let's talk about him. No.
Oh, yeah, I think it is Bill Sage. So I was like, I don't know who to put the second one as, and I was like, oh fuck, I'll just put all of them in. Also featuring Justin Theroux, Josh Lucas, Chloe Sevigny, Reese Witherspoon, Samantha Mathis, Jared Leto, and Willem Dafoe. So that's 2 Letos because we also did Requiem, but it's also 2 Samantha Mathis because we did Jesus' Son.
No, that's Samantha Morton. Samantha Mathis was the
God
wife
damn
in,
it.
The Punisher.
The
She's
Punisher.
That's right.
Yeah.
I always get Samantha Morton and Samantha Mathis names mixed up. I know the different ones, but I always get the names mixed up. That's right.
It's all good. Yeah.
Nothing really good has happened to her in either movie either. I mean,
No.
Yeah.
I mean, she survives this one. We can't say the same as the Punisher. Trivia. There's just a fuck ton of trivia. American Psycho was previously going to be made by Stuart Gordon with Johnny Depp with Bret Easton Ellis writing the script. Gordon wanted to do it in black and white and wanted the NC-17 rating. And then it was also with David Cronenberg, who apparently wanted to take out all the violence and all the scenes in restaurants and wanted to star Brad Pitt. And finally, Oliver Stone with Leo DiCaprio. Yeah, I don't understand how that works. When Lionsgate picked up the rights to American Psycho, Herron was set to direct and write. She considered Billy Crudup, who turned it down, Ben Chaplin, Robert Sean Leonard, Johnny Lee Miller, and Jared Leto. Eventually, she settled on Bill because he was the only actor who saw the silliness of the role and also is the only actor who didn't ask what made Bateman tick and what his childhood was like. The producers tried to get Herron to instead pick Edward Norton, but she refused. She was allowed Bill, but had to cast 2 other big name actors, which she got in Witherspoon and Willem Dafoe. When Leonardo DiCaprio signed on, Herron left the project because she wanted to do her version with Christian Bale. Bale still held out hope. The Stone DiCaprio version would have had a script by Matt Markwalder. He's done nothing else. James Woods as Detective Kimball, Cameron Diaz as Evelyn, Elizabeth Berkley as Courtney, and 70 as Jean. When Leonardo DiCaprio was still attached to the project, feminist activist Gloria Steinem lobbied him not to make the movie as his fan base consisted predominantly of young teenage girls and he could ruin his career. Steinem had spoken out about the novel several times and was against the film version in any version. Her involvement is rendered especially interesting and as far as she would soon become Christian Bale's stepmother. Lionsgate hired Mary Herron back and took the budget from $40 million to $7 million, as DiCaprio was going to get $21 million to appear in the film. She decided to keep 70 as Jean.
I think every decision that was made is ultimately the right one. I would watch that version out of curiosity, though. I don't think it would work, but I'd be fascinated by it.
You're talking about the Stone version?
Yeah, I mean,
with DiCaprio,
the DiCaprio version. Oh God, okay? Never mind, because me and Oliver Stone aren't really friends at this point in time. But the casting does sound interesting. I mean, Elizabeth Berkley in this movie would have been a trip. Yeah, as Courtney, you said.
Yes, that would have worked too. Good.
Crudup would have been interesting casting too, if in like I mean, he's maybe of all the actors that you named as like potential ones. Like, I don't know if Robert Sean Leonard would be very good.
No,
Johnny Lee Miller. Not really into that.
Johnny Depp, especially not.
Oh Jesus! No. Jeez, if Johnny Depp was in this movie, it would be unwatchable today. Like it would be so upsetting to watch.
Yeah.
That's interesting too that DiCaprio was considered. I forgot about that, but like I was thinking with like the scene where Bale is like talking about like 78. It's like where do you want to go? He's like holding a pen. I'm like thinking, man, this is like a precursor to the "Sell Me This Pen" scene in Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know. I know that's like a movie that's like years later, and I know that's a true story, but like I don't know. That was just like a funny note. I thought I just sort of like the motivational speaker tone.
DiCaprio would have been like, there's already like almost all of the violence is taken out from the book, and you think this movie is more violent than it actually is, but you don't really see as much. He would have asked for like even less because he wouldn't want to ruin his image. So it would have made sense. And I think the Gloria Steinem thing is just like, that's the real story. But the story they told is like, oh, he dropped out because he wanted to do the beach. Yeah.
Well, he is. I have not seen The Beach, but I assume he is shirtless for most of it too. So that would probably, and it was Danny Boyle, right? That's a Danny Boyle movie, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
we've all seen it. Yeah.
I actually would like to see that. I've not seen. I've heard it's not good, but I'm a Boyle fan. So,
but like that brings in like that's kind of the best of both worlds for DiCaprio, in that like, oh, I can be wet and shirtless and be in a Danny Boyle movie. Like,
I mean,
perfect. Like that fires on all cylinders for what I would like at this stage of my career.
Exactly. Yeah. Looking for a way to create the character, Patrick Bateman and Christian Bale stumbled upon a Tom Cruise appearance on Letterman. Bale saw in Cruise this very intense friendliness with nothing behind the eyes, and he basically based his character on that, and also the character of Nicolas Cage in Vampire's Kiss, which is very similar.
Yes.
Interestingly, Tom Cruise is actually featured in the novel. He lives in the same apartment complex as Bateman, who meets him in an elevator, and he says like, what does he say? He's like, oh, I love your movie, Bartender, and he's like, it was called Cocktail, and he was like, oh, that's right, it was, and that's the only conversation they have. It's really funny. The single biggest cost of the film was purchasing the rights to the various songs used throughout, which that's money well spent. The film had various problems with designer labels during production. Some would allow Christian Bale to wear their clothes, but not when he was killing somebody. Rolex agreed that anybody in the film could wear their watches except Patrick Bateman. Hence the famous line from the book, "Don't touch the Rolex," had to be changed to "Don't touch the watch." And Comme des Garçons refused to allow one of their overnight bags to be used to carry a corpse, so Jean Paul Gaultier was used instead. That's weird backstage stuff where it's just like you gotta send that to somebody else. It'd be like, how is our product going to be used? Oh yeah, it's going to be used to haul a corpse, and they're just like, yeah, that's fine.
There is like a special thanks at the end of the movie. I can't remember. I wrote down the brand. My handwriting's illegible, but she says like, it says special thank you to this company for the fine custom made clothing, and it was like, oh, okay, that's kind of funny that they were willing to have that. But yeah.
Yeah. Vast majority of the dialogue in the movie is taken word for word from the novel. The differences in the novels, and I will be annoying later and mention more differences in the novel versus the movie, and I apologize in advance, but certain scenes either had to be completely removed or toned down for the film due to the graphic and extreme nature of the murders and torture scenes. The monologue Bateman has when he calls his lawyer, he is describing things that happen in the book but not in the movie, so everything he describes is in the book but not in the movie. In the novel, Bateman is way more misogynistic, racist, sexist, homophobic, and a xenophobic character. These characteristics were overall heavily toned down in the film in order to make the character more tolerable and palatable, even though some of these characteristics are still subtly presented. We also meet his mother and his brother, Sean Bateman, from Rules of Attraction in the book. While the film takes place over the course of several months, the novel takes place over the course of 2 years. Jean never finds Bateman's journal of demented drawings in the book. Paul Allen in the book is named Paul Owen, and I listened to Mary Herron's her 05 commentary, and she said that quote unquote they made her change the name and never specified why. So I don't know why. Whitney Houston refused to allow any of her songs to be used in the film to get around that. The scene where he talks about Whitney Houston and Jeannie Turner makes fun of him for owning a Whitney Houston CD. They play an orchestral cover of a song. Patrick suggests to Elizabeth to have sex with Christy, to which Elizabeth scoffs at the suggestion and asks him why he thinks she'd be into lesbianism. Patrick responds that she went to Sarah Lawrence College. In real life, Genevieve Turner, who portrays Elizabeth, is also one of the writers, went to Sarah Lawrence College and is a lesbian. So, and I think that's the entire reason she wanted to be in the movie. She was like, I have to be that.
She is secretly my favorite. I mean, she's only in the movie for like 10 minutes, but she's like possibly my favorite performance in this movie. I love how much she's poking fun at herself in terms of that, and also just considering that she's the co-writer, she's able to nail the satire so well in her line deliveries of everything the film is going for.
This was the second time in 2 years that Lionsgate found itself in trouble with the MPAA over one of their films. They had run afoul of the censors with Dogma, which we covered, which was deemed to be blasphemous. It wasn't the violence the MPAA had an issue with, it was the overall tone plus the threesome scene. And now for my favorite trivia fact, Christian Bale insisted on getting Bret Easton Ellis's approval for his portrayal before filming and arranged a meeting. Bale showed up to the meeting dressed and groomed as Bateman and even introduced himself as Patrick Bateman. After 10 minutes, Bret Easton Ellis begged Bale to stop because his hands were shaking and he could not take it anymore. Bret Easton Ellis has said this was the single creepiest moment of his life.
Oh, wow. He scared Bret Easton Ellis, and this was his own creation.
I know.
It feels so karmic. I love it.
I know. It's just like I'm meeting one of my characters and I fucking hate it. Please stop.
New card. What do you think?
Woohoo. Very nice.
Patrick, you're so sweet.
Jean,
Yes, Patrick?
would you like to accompany me to dinner? Sabrina, why don't you dance a little? Christy, get down on your knees. We're not through yet.
That's a wonderful suit. You look so soft.
I don't think I can control myself. If you stay, something bad will happen. I feel lethal, on the verge of frenzy. I think my mask of sanity is about to slip. Do you have any witnesses or fingerprints?
Actually, yes.
Human.
I know my behavior can be erratic sometimes.
Hey, Paul!
So, what do you do?
I'm into, murders and executions mostly. I have all the characteristics of a human being, but not a single clear, identifiable emotion. I simply am not there. I just had to kill a lot of people!
Kate, as our guest, can you please hit us with initial thoughts? You've, of course, seen this before, but just tell us what you think about it.
Yeah. Well, American Psycho, I'll put it to you this way. See, when it came out, I was 10 in 2000. And I remember like going to the grocery store and seeing it on little kiosks leading up to cash registers. And I was terrified of the movie. Like it seemed like, that which shall not be seen,
Yes.
And so I didn't end up watching it until I was almost to college age when I finally put it on. And the first time I watched it, like it kind of hit me with this wave of, like, I knew that I had seen more than I expected. I expected it to be a horror movie, but it wasn't. It was much more like this deep dive into like the human psyche. And ever since then, every time I rewatch it, I almost pull out something new from it, which I think is interesting. But most recently, and this is probably for me just a testament to where maybe we are as a society right now, but I kind of see it as a statement to the disconnection of humanity, feeling disconnected and having your identities confused for each other is like, obviously the elephant in the room would be social media, but I also think that it's a bit deeper than that now for us as a society. So yeah, that's kind of my main go-to at this point, is just how it's much more than just a film about a Wall Street yuppie in the 80s, So.
Right. Yeah, because the thing is the problem with satire that can always get wrong is that it's either all message or not funny, or it's funny with no message. And this movie, with the book and the movie, is just pitch perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think honestly, one of my favorite scenes in the film, which sounds dark and demented, is just when he's chasing the girl down the stairs, and he's in nothing but tennis shoes with a chainsaw. It's just like for me, just one of the funniest images.
Did he have the tennis shoes on when he was killing Genevieve Turner in the bed, or did he put them on afterwards?
No, I noticed that this time. They were on when he's under the covers with Guinevere Turner. They were already on.
That's ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that scene, Mary Herron and Genevieve Turner. Is it Guinevere? I'm just gonna say Jenny Turner. Guinevere Turner. Jenny Tease. Both of them said that scene, that was like where they were like making it the most horror movie, because like, you know, she's screaming and running around and, you know, all that, because all the rest of it, I mean, the Jared Leto kill scene is pretty horrific, but you don't really see anything, and it's also, as soon as he hits it with the axe, he says a lot about Dorcia, so it's really taking the piss out of that. But I mean, it's still that scene is where it gets the balance right, where it is horrifying, where she's running from him, but he has a chainsaw with tennis shoes on with nothing else on. And Mary Herron said that she was like, I want to do the scene where the woman has the clothes on, but the guy doesn't, and flip that on its head. So yeah, it's a great scene. And they were all...
What? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was also going to say, there was an episode I listened to, at least a little bit of, where Guinevere Turner was on Switchblade Sisters, and it was like, when you talk about genre, mainly horror films, she picked American Werewolf in London, but Guinevere Turner did talk a little bit about American Psycho, and she said, yeah, you'd expect, because I wrote American Psycho and I starred in it, that I love horror movies. And she's like, no, I'm still a fraidy cat. Like, I watched myself being murdered in that movie and I still get scared watching it, even though I was like, you know, physically present in, obviously, through the whole thing, which I think is really interesting too, when you that, you know, both her and Mary Herron had to go to some dark places that even scared themselves too.
Oh, that reminds me, in our previous episode talking about Sherry Moon Zombie not liking horror movies and can't even watch the scenes she's in Devil's Rejects. But Charlie, initial thoughts?
So yeah, I'd seen this movie many times. It was around 2006, I believe, I first saw it, because like you, Kate, I was born in 91, so when this movie came out, I was 9, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then, you know, I was in high school. I remember I was starting to get into edgier stuff, like much edgier horror movies. Saw and Hostel were coming out and stuff like that. And I remember I blindly bought, like, for those who don't live in New England, I blindly bought the $8 DVD of the uncut version from Newbury Comics, which is like, you know, a big media store. And I just came back home from the mall, and I have to use the bathroom, and I dropped my bag on the table, and from the bathroom I can hear my dad go, "Oh my God." And I come out, and he's holding it, and he goes, "Have you seen this?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "I have." And I'm like, "You and Mom watched this movie?" And I'm just like, oh God, like back in 2000, my parents probably tucked me into bed and were just like, okay, good night, hon, we're gonna go watch American Psycho. I really loved it ever since I was a teenager. And it's funny, I was one of the first times, like you, Kate, I expected just a horror movie, but even though my parents didn't say, take this back or anything like that, like I was watching it, and it was one of the few times where I was like, I don't feel like I should be watching this, even though my parents are like, oh, have at it. Like, there was just, it was so, it's such a weird metaphor to bring up, but it's so meaty and so rich with commentaries on consumerism and fitting in and misogyny and all this stuff. And I loved it when I was a teenager, but I was just expecting something really edgy, and what I don't think I fully understood all of the social commentaries it was going for. And it was interesting to me. I can't help but think about this, and I know we'll probably get into this a little bit, but I was very much in the closet in high school. So I think there were certain aspects of it to me that kind of hit me in ways I didn't expect it to subconsciously. Like the whole scene at the beginning where Reese Witherspoon and him are in the back of a car, and she's just like, why are you doing X, Y, and Z? And he's like, because I want to fit in. And like, and I kind of didn't realize it in high school, but I was kind of doing the same thing even as a teenager. I was, listening to bands people thought were cool, and like, what can I do to make myself normal and stuff like that. And like, obviously I wasn't fucking murdering people, but I do think that like it hit a nerve in certain ways I didn't fully understand yet as a 15-year-old. And I will say, watching it again now, I haven't seen it in a very long time, I still love it. It's funnier, even funnier than I remember certain things just went over my head as a teenager. And it's also scarier in that I agree with both of you, Kevin and Kate, that like, it's not just about someone who works for Wall Street in the 1980s. Like I was watching this and I was thinking, oh my God, I haven't seen this since Donald Trump became president. Like, and I had that moment where I'm like, oh my God, this movie really was like putting its finger on the pulse of like white rich New York men, and like in certain ways where I was just like, oh my God, like, and I was talking to some friends at work saying I rewatched it, and they were like, it's fascinating that this movie became such a cultural touchstone, and it almost feels like now it's over 20 years old, it almost felt like a warning, like in certain ways.
Yep.
And it became just even funnier and even more disturbing to me. And the other thing I will say is I completely forgot that Patrick Bateman's 27, and I'm watching this when I'm 31, and just that thought of like first time watching it being like, I shouldn't be seeing this right now, this is way too much for me. And now me just being like, oh my God, I'm so fucking old. Like,
look at this kid.
Yeah, look at this little scrapper. Yeah, like, oh my God. So
time flies.
Yeah. So we'll obviously go into details about a lot of other things, but that's kind of where my viewing from a few days ago has led me to now, that it's always been a movie I've loved. Oddly enough, my love for it has evolved and grown for different reasons as time has gone on. So
yeah, I know this was definitely a one that my brother rented, and I probably watched around that time, so probably like 10 or 11 ish, so like 03 maybe, or maybe 04. I can't be sure, but it was the same thing with Rules of Attraction. It was definitely Big Brother renting movies and me being like, I should be able to watch this because I want to be an adult. But so I probably watched it around there, and yeah, pretty much everything was probably lost on me. And but it's definitely a movie that throughout the years has just gotten better and better and better and more funnier and everything like that. Like I was telling y'all in the group chat where it's just like the scene where it's Justin Theroux and Bale doing coke in the bathroom, and it's just like, this is sweet and low. It's like, if we do enough of it, we'll be fine. And then the guy in the next stall goes, can you keep it down? I'm trying to do drugs. I always forgot about that line, and it made me laugh so much this time. But this time was very interesting because I had never read the book or listened to the audiobook. So I listened to the audiobook and then I watched the movie, and it was like half I still love the movie, and the other half, the entire time I couldn't just sit and watch the movie because the entire time I'm comparing it to the book. So, but it's really amazing what they pulled off, because everything it takes out, it's completely fine, and they justify it, and everything that it puts in, which is honestly not that much, like it mostly is just decreasing it and putting it in a very different way, because there's a lot of stuff it takes from the book but reuses it in a different way, like the scene where he has the nail gun at Chloe 70. That doesn't happen in the book, but it does happen to his ex-girlfriend who he's talking to, who he eventually kills, which he talks about in the monologue. So it's just like, because they were both talking about in the commentary, where it's just like, people think when you adapt a book all you do is just put it in script form and whatnot, and this one is so much way more than that, because like I said, it's 2 years in the book, and it's about I think it's like 300-400 pages, so it's a lot to condense down, and nothing really gets lost. The only thing is, it kind of, the book is also like very intentionally boring. Like the first 3 hours, no murder or anything is mentioned, and it's just them talking at a restaurant, and every single person, you know exactly what they wear and what brand name, and it goes like that for like 3 hours. But then as soon as the first mention of murder happens, then all of those scenes where it's just monotonous talking about everything and whatnot, it starts to get like suspenseful. So So it has that. So this watch was very, very interesting to me because it's just comparing it to the book and whatnot, and it's I really don't think there's anything the movie does that is not as good as the book, but it's just very, very, very different. But it's an incredible movie. I love it so much. It's one of my favorite comedies, I guess. It's much more of a comedy than it is a horror movie. So, but
very funny.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just incredible. I love it a lot. But Charlie, what you were saying about Donald Trump is the funny thing is in the book he mentions Donald Trump like 40 times and he's obsessed with him. So,
and then in the movie there's
the
even...
restaurant. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Charlie. I think you're
no,
about to say it. Go.
We were both thinking the same thing. Yeah, is that Ivana Trump?
Yeah, and then they also, I don't know like how long I don't know exactly when Trump got together with his current wife and everything, but they do talk about how they. I think Reese Witherspoon says like we have plans. We're gonna go have dinner with someone named Melania or whatever. I was like thinking like, oh, like obviously
maybe, yeah.
like before that and everything. But it's like I just thought like that's kind of a funny coincidence of like that being there. But anyways,
because there's a funny scene where they're at a restaurant and they're just like, why don't we just get the pizza or whatever? And he's like, the pizza here is terrible, and he like gets this huge huff about it, and then somebody eventually, like a few chapters later, was like, why don't we go to that place and have the pizza? He's like, I told you it's terrible. And he's like, well, I read in the whatever that Donald Trump loves the pizza. And he was like, you know what? Maybe it was just a really bad batch and maybe we should go back. But yeah, love this movie. Bryden, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I had not seen this since I was in high school. This was also a movie I watched around the time when I was starting to like be able to watch more. I mean, I have like my old movie logs here where like I watched it around the time I saw stuff like Boiler Room and Knockaround Guys. It's like just like
yes.
watching R-rated movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really liked it. It's funny how like this movie is like very weirdly popular like with people like even like non-cinephiles like my brother who like loves this movie and has seen it multiple times. I mean, yeah, it's like just a really well-paced movie. Like it's only like maybe 95 minutes like before credits and everything, and it moves like through all its like comedy beats and horror beats like really fleetly. And it's funny, like Heron is like it's funny how like the visuals in the movie will change like depending on the tone and everything. Like, you know, you get those like there's like scenes where like you do feel like you're watching like a very serious horror movie. I mean, I think it's really interesting how like she will like differentiate between the tones and like the violent scenes. I mean, the Jared Leto murder scene, like, yeah, I think that's very much keyed up where it's like, yeah, he's screaming about like restaurant reservations. That's like his motive for murder. It's like it's very silly. Whereas like I think the scene where like he's like killing Cara Seymour and like Guinevere Turner, it's like I feel like, I mean, yeah, there is like the very heightened detail of like him wearing sneakers and running around with a chainsaw, but I don't know, like the way it just like zooms in on her body with like the chainsaw stuck in and like there's no music. It's just like leaving you in that unpleasantness of the moment. I think like I don't know if like it's interesting. I think there's like that scene's played much more seriously because like it is like I feel like if you think about like stuff that happens in the world, it's like people are not getting killed over restaurant reservations necessarily every day and everything, like silly stuff like that, or business cards and stuff. But like whereas like the misogyny like that motivates his murders, it's like that manifestation is like much, I guess, like a little bit more possible. And but then like, you know, in the scenes when like, you know, Walking on Sunshine plays and everything, like the helicopter shots of like all the skyscrapers and like the low angle zooms, it's like I feel like you could easily like watch that scene and like for a few seconds think like, oh, am I watching like an 80s like comedy like Working Girl or something, where it's like, you know, a person like working at the office or whatever. But then like, yeah, and all the performances are just like perfectly pitched to the material. I mean, I think it's interesting how like Bale and everyone else like just like talks like in like these monotones and everything, but then you have like the performers like, you know, Chloe Sevigny and Cara Seymour, where like them acting like real people with like tangible emotions like that, like throws everything off and everything, where it's like, oh, like this like lends a bit of like tension to it and everything. Like it's like it lends you a bit of like an outsider perspective and everything. It almost like kind of audience circus, like what the fuck is the deal with these people I'm talking to and everything. And like, you know, it's yeah, and like the twist. I mean, the twist. I mean, I've had conversations with people where it's like, oh, like what is it? Like, did he actually commit all these murders? And I think the movie, what's good about the movie, and we talked about movies before, like, you know, High Tension, where it's like when you throw in a twist where it's like, oh, what's actually happening? It's like,
don't mention High Tension. Get out of here.
Stupid. But like no, but like American Psycho, what was so effective, I think, about the movie is like a comment on privilege. It's like it's whether or not he's committing these murders, and like maybe some of them are. I think some of them definitely are real, and like, you know, or like maybe he's not guilty of everything. Maybe but he's definitely guilty of something. It's like whether he did it or not, it's like the comment still like, you know, commentary still like cuts through, where it's like this guy has the privilege, like, you know, being a white cis, you know, hetero male and everything, with like all this money and everything, like he could get away with it, like it doesn't matter, and like everyone, and you know, whether or not he's caught, there will be like someone else like who like is mistaken for him, with like who's also looks, I mean, like the fact that like everyone is mistaking each other for like who they are, it's like, oh, is that like everyone thinks he's like Marcus or whatever when he's actually Patrick Bateman and everything. It's like, you know, these guys, all these guys are alike, and they're all going to get away with it. And if one of them goes, then there'll be like another person like to come along and replace them. It's so yeah, I think it really is like very incisive, like the commentary. Yeah, but it's also just like a really well paced and sharply directed movie, and it's very funny. Yeah, lots of quotable lines, so that I'm sure we'll talk about. Yeah.
I just kind of had like a like a light bulb moment, which it's interesting that I was talking about this with friends yesterday, and I don't know why, just didn't know the Leonardo DiCaprio was almost going to get cast. I didn't know about that fact because one of the only other movies I can think of, and it's a much more mainstream movie, but just as filthy and vulgar, is that compares to this, in my opinion, in terms of its cultural impact, is Wolf of Wall Street to me, where Wolf of Wall Street, he's basically playing a similar character, except instead of murder, it's violence in basically every other form. You know, and it is funny to me that like Leo, just thinking about this now, that Leo's like, that'll tank your career, you're a pretty boy. But in 2013, when you've had a reputation of working with Martin Scorsese for like how many films, you can basically do the exact same thing without, and it basically comments on almost everything. And I think Wolf of Wall Street is equally brilliant. I love that movie too. But it's also a film that I think is interesting in that this film, well, I think the main difference is that this film is written and directed by women about men, and Martin Scorsese is fully putting your feet to the fire in terms of the horrors of men in a similar way. But it is interesting to me that both films are huge cultural touchstones, both very much on Twitter as memes and whatnot, and are very much controversial, and at least to this day, in my opinion, are completely misunderstood by awful men at the same time. Like some people view this movie and Wolf of Wall Street in ways that are not that like, you, how do you not see this as a biting critique of everything that these characters, every action these characters take? But and there is something about that I do find to be, because I think there is the one side of the argument of, isn't this dangerous to make this type of movie? And it's like, well, yes, but there will always be stupid people in the world. And I do think that both movies serve as very important indictments of this type of toxic masculinity and misogyny. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry if I'm bringing us down a new road, but when you brought up that Leo was initially going to play Patrick Bateman, I had no idea. So I just find that to be an interesting little connection there.
Yeah. Also, going off that point, Charlie, I definitely went to high school with people who were like, Wolf of Wall Street, I'm going to be like Belfort and everything. Like, you're like, I want to be like that guy and everything. It's like, I don't think that's. Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's a guy. Did you go to high school with people who went said, I want to be like Patrick Bateman? That's my lifestyle goal.
Also,
you actually
adapted. Oh, sorry, Brandon.
Did you go to school? Did you know people who were like Patrick Bateman?
I went to, when in high school. I mean, Wolf of Wall Street came out when I was in college, but for me, I think the other film that was kind of like this, where it was just like, you got to see this, it's so fucked up, between like, you know, bros and stuff like that, was Clockwork Orange, which is another one of those, you know, he's a horrible, horrible person. And people were, you know, I was drawn to them because I was just like, whoa, I have to see what this is all about. But yeah, people watched that shit for the wrong reasons and took the wrong message away, when it's so clearly a social commentary against this type of behavior, and that how society forms this type of, you know, and it's 2022, and like, things are as scary as ever. So like, I think that it is important that we watch certain things like this. But yeah, and Wolf of Wall Street, I was in college, so like, I luckily was, everyone I was friends with at the time knew how like disgusting that movie is. I think that movie is hysterical, but I think that Martin Scorsese's basically shaking his head behind the camera the entire time, even if he is cracking up.
100%.
But it is one of those things where I can totally understand if you go see something like American Psycho or Wolf of Wall Street in a theater and you have the wrong kind of audience, it can be just sickening. You know what I mean? Like,
I think a lot of that has to do with how it's marketed at the time,
Yeah.
because when American Psycho came out, at least from my memory of being 10, when the trailer was, popping around everywhere, it was marketed as a horror movie.
Yes.
I don't exactly know how A Clockwork Orange was marketed, but I do know that both of those films are very satirical and they are meant to be taken with a grain of salt, and they're meant to be laughed at and thought about and thought provoking. And I think that the interesting thing about like comedy specifically is that it's able to shed light on topics that are sometimes tough to speak about in a serious manner, and allow people to have conversation and discourse about them afterwards, which is why, in today's cancel culture driven society, it is kind of scary that we are seeing a need to want to shut down the commentators, to shut down the comedy, to police art, because when you start policing art, that's whenever how free is a society under those circumstances. So comedy being the main thing here, satire really being the main thread that drives all of those through. It's a really good way to shed light on society and what you're, as you said, it's one of those things where every time you watch it, you kind of see something different, which is me. Is every time I watch it, I'm like, there's something new.
So what you're saying is that Patrick Bateman would get canceled, or I don't know if he would, but
no, what I mean is like at the time, right?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I see what you're saying, but like at the time when those films came out, they're kind of like sleeper films, right? Because if you they each of them had a bunch of protests leading up to and during their time in theaters, where people were angry that they existed in the first place, but now they look back on them and say, oh, I see the importance of that piece of art.
They're also based on books by what I would consider terrible people. I mean, because Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, I haven't read the book. I can only imagine
you
what
can
that
assume.
book was. I could assume. Bret Easton Ellis, based on, I guess I should have mentioned this. I read Less Than Zero in college and I really liked it at the time. I have not seen the movie. This is before.
Movie's bad. I'm halfway through the book though.
Yeah, the book's
pretty good.
I liked the book, probably because I was in college and was like, I go to school with some of these people. But I do find it to be interesting that, and yeah, I know you're the one who's read the book out of us four, Kevin. I just remember, it feels wrong of me to comment on it, but I know that the book was heavily criticized of like being misogynistic without enough of the self-awareness of it. And I'm curious what your take is, because knowing what we know now about Bret Easton Ellis, it's like it makes wanting to dive into the book much more difficult for me, especially considering I'm such a slow reader and want to read so many books. But I've heard that's what the criticism towards the source material is that Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner kind of twisted those elements into something much more palatable and satirical, and all of the violence is on off screen for the most part. It's all aftermath. Whereas I've heard the book is much more graphic and much more arguably exploitative. I mean, and again, I haven't read it, so I should, maybe it's wrong of me to not even comment on it, but I'm just curious what your take is on that in terms of.
No, you can comment on it, because I mean, that is the main thing about it. It's just how gruesome the violence is in it, which it feels like a lot more, because it's like probably 5 to 10% of the book, but it feels like a lot more because the details, and it's just so exhausting every time it pops up. And yes, it is primarily towards women. Like, of course, there's Paul Owen / Paul Allen and the homeless guy and whatnot. But then it's just like, and then other people, he kills a guy because he happens to be gay. He kills somebody because it's so much harder to be like, oh, this is an interesting character to follow around in the book. In the movie, it's a lot, more amped up and whatnot. The book is very, very hard to get into once the violence starts happening, because, and the interesting thing with the book and the movie, as far as the women are portrayed in the book, Chrissy has like no lines whatsoever, and she really doesn't in the movie either. But the way that she's shown, her eyes, she knows this guy's full of shit. When the other woman comes in and they're just like, and he's like, "Do you want to know what I do?" And they're just like, "No,
No,
like, yeah,
not really."
It's just like they
funny.
still take the book and they don't like give them extra lines or anything like that. But there's just so many shots of just the women reacting to him and stuff like that that is not in the book because they don't have any. It's all from Patrick Bateman's point of view, and there's no extra lines or anything like that. So yes, it is a very, very tough book, and it's if you if you want to call it misogyny, it definitely feels like it when you read it. And when Guinevere Turner met him for the first time, he's just like, I can't believe you wrote such a misogynistic book. And he was like, I thought it was really feminist. So it's all in the eye of the beholder, and it's very excessive, but also the entire book is excessive. But there's like one or two scenes in the book where I was just like mouth open, because like it was like halfway through it where whenever he kills his ex-girlfriend, where I was just like, I mean, this isn't that explicit, honestly. And then that happened, and I was like, oh, I can see why people try to ban this fucking book. So it's if you can handle it, it is a very, very, very interesting book that goes well with the movie. I wouldn't call one better than the other. They both work in tandem, and they're both a lot. The book has stayed with me a lot. So there's that.
There's definitely a difference, I think, between like investing, just the time investment, I guess, of reading a book that's like, like 500 pages versus watching a movie that's like, an hour 40 or whatever. It's like, it's a much easier sell for someone like me.
Yeah.
It's like, so I have to be in this unpleasant headspace with this guy for like an hour 40 versus like 7 hours of my life.
Yeah,
I'll take the movie.
Yeah. It's rough, but it gills with the emotions, especially like at the end of the movie where he just wants nothing more than to get caught, because that would make him different. He would be known as a murderer and not just a nameless guy at Pierce and stuff like that, and he can't even get arrested. And it's like you get much more into that mentality of just how pointless he feels his life is, and he can't even, to the point where it's so pointless where it's just like, maybe if I killed somebody I'd feel something. And then at the end of it, he's like, this I get nothing from this either, and now I can't even get arrested for it. So what the fuck is the point of my life? So, which, is very hard once you get to the end of that, where you're just like, oh, why should I care about this person? But it's just so fascinating the way that he writes, which Bret Easton Ellis is very hit or miss with a lot of people. I feel like I should have read these books like 15 years ago. I feel like as a white male, I should have, had my Bret Easton moment already, but now I am. But it's been very, very enlightening, the type of stuff, because I also listened to Rules of Attraction, which I liked a lot less, but I liked the movie a little bit more. But it's very interesting. The way he writes is very unique. So if you can handle it, definitely check it out.
You had your Chuck Palahniuk phase, though, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, me too. So you did something right.
Yeah.
In high school.
And it's fascinating to. Or sorry, Charlie, I didn't want to.
Oh no. That's all. Yeah. That's all. Like I because you mentioned I should have read these books 15 years ago, but in our private chat, you were like, why haven't I read these? I had my Chuck Palahniuk phase, and I was like, I've only read one. I had my Chuck Palahniuk phase. I mean,
Oh, yeah. I definitely read Fight Club in 5th grade. I don't know why, but yeah, I loved it. Yeah. Kicked ass. Kate, were you about to say something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to make mention that I'm pretty sure that Bret Easton Ellis has said that Rules of Attraction is his favorite adaptation of a book that he's written.
Yes.
So it's interesting that you prefer the movie to the book. I wonder if he feels the same.
Right. And we'll get into that in the episode, but yeah, it's a lot of those characters are so knowingly nothing, like they're not characters, like they have no arc or anything like that. Listening to it is a lot harder to get invested to than when I'm watching the Dawson and Shannon Sosserman act it out and whatnot, and also just the flourishes of the movie that are there that make it a lot more interesting to me than the book, because the book is literally just this chapter is from Sean's point of view, this chapter is Shannon's point of view, or Lauren's point of view, and stuff like that. But yeah,
sorry, I didn't want to.
No, go ahead.
Jumping over people. It was it's been interesting having not read any of read any of Ellis's books, but like having seen like adaptations of his work or like stuff that he's even like he's gotten into screenwriting in the last decade or so. It's interesting to see like the different like tonal and stylistic takes that people have taken on his material, like, and like that's like kind of like thrilling to sort of find that, like, you know, just sort of like where like you could get a consistent worldview, but just like different tones and anything. Like Less Than Zero, I mean I talked about this a bit in our group chat, but like, you know, Less Than Zero, I mean, that's why part of why Ellis, I think, like doesn't like it is like how it's like it plays it so sincerely. It plays it as like this very earnest tragedy where it's like this guy trying to save his friend and everything. And then, you know, it sounds like Ellis, like he wrote a sequel to that called Imperial Bedrooms, and just reading the synopsis, it's like, oh, you thought there was humanity in these characters? Fuck you! I'm gonna double down on like them just doing the most depraved shit ever. And I don't think that movie entirely works, even though Robert Downey Jr. is very good in it. Andrew McCarthy sucks in it.
Andrew McCarthy sucks in most things, let's be honest.
There you go. Yeah. And then American Psycho, you know, it's like playing it up like as like this like very like grisly but like very darkly humorous like thing. And then Rules of Attraction, I feel like kind of tries to split the difference between being sincere in some moments and then like kind of ironic in this very darkly humorous way. And it doesn't always like thread that needle so well. And then like he wrote a movie in the last like a couple years ago only called Smiley Face Killers, which is about like a college kid who's like very handsome and doesn't really have a whole lot going on, and like he's like sort of he thinks he's being like stalked by someone, but like everyone else is just caught up in their own bullshit to not really notice and everything. And it plays it up as like this paranoid horror, but like still has like this very, you know, very much the milieu of like rich, spoiled, self-absorbed people who are just like kind of caught up with their own shit and everything, and like ignoring like the horrible stuff that like is like lingering underneath the surface. And it does it in a so it's really interesting to sort of find out like the pet themes, even if like I don't like all these adaptations necessarily as like just as films and everything, not even looking at it as like as an Ellis fan, because, you know, I haven't read his books and everything. It's just interesting to see like what different stuff you can put on that, how I don't know, the diversity of like of representations tonally and stylistically is cool.
He also oh, sorry, Brandon.
No, it's all good. Yeah, and it's interesting too, like, you know, we're talking about like, you know, scaling some of the stuff down, like the racism and xenophobia of the Bateman character. It's like, but like, yeah, you totally get the idea in the movie, and like how it honestly seems more true to real life that like, you know, Bateman is like saying stuff like, hey, cool with the anti-Semitic remarks, to talk about like how we need to solve apartheid. He's like talking about that in like public restaurants and everything, but then like when he's in like his own like private boys club where he's like smoking cigars with his buddies, he's like saying like, oh, you know, there's no such thing as a woman with a great personality. Like they're just like laughing about this like stupid misogynistic shit and everything. It's like when, you know, it totally like makes sense that like this is a guy who would like, you know, he presents himself as very outwardly progressive, but then like just has like all this like horrible hate like inside of him, and he only expresses in like the most private spaces. And the movie too, like there's like only a couple of scenes I think where he's out in the real world and everything, like standing on. I think like you see him standing on a sidewalk when he's going into the club that plays like New Order or whatever, but like most of the time it's just like keeping you stuck inside like these giant office buildings and these sterile apartments, and it's like it really does like kind of blend this claustrophobia where you are just like not just stuck in this guy's mental headspace, but also his environment. It's just like so fucking unpleasant to be in, but really effective, I think.
I also completely forgot, because I haven't seen this movie in so long, that like he does start off with the anti-Semitic remarks, but then before you've even seen him kill somebody, he goes to the dry cleaners and he's like, get these stains out, and it's clearly blood, and the people running the dry cleaners are Asian, and the English is clearly not, they clearly don't speak fluent English, and he's just screaming at them. And then he basically says, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And then that they understand, and they're like, oh my God. And then it is actually pretty funny when someone recognizes him and they're like, oh, what's the matter? These are like, hey, good to see you. These are the best dry cleaners in town. Yeah, well, they can't get this out. And they're like, she's like, what's that?
It's a cran apple. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, they're bug guys. And then I also forgot that the homeless person that he completely berates and kills is also black.
Like, yeah, played by Reggie Cathy, the character actor.
So I completely forgot that he is absolutely horrible to any person of color he comes across in this movie.
The interesting thing in the book is that every time they go outside, Ellis writes that there's a homeless person, and they describe the homeless person every single time they're outside. So it's like they are always, in almost every single scene, if they go outside, they mention homeless people. So it's like even more, it's just like all the excess and whatnot, and then it just describes it as a homeless person outside. Meanwhile, they'll describe Paul Owen as having a Rolex and this type of shirt and all of this, but really nails down that. And yes, that homeless person kill in the book is a as you can assume is a lot worse. But I don't really need to go through the plot of it all, but if we could do favorite scenes, which for me you can't get any better than Huey Lewis in the News and killing Jared Leto. That's just one of the greatest needle drops of all time. And also, of course, the whole thing of is that song is it's the movie. So it's a genius needle drop. And I also love after he kills him and takes it off, there's like a minute of just him not talking and just smoking a cigar and just being with the dead body. Meanwhile, after that, it's just so haphazardly done and he doesn't get to quote unquote enjoy it. But yeah, that scene is just pitch perfect. Bryden.
Yeah. And it's funny too with like, him like, trying to fit in and everything, but then like, it seems like him trying to like give all these music monologues and everything will be like, that's like him trying to strike out his individuality, and then he can't even have that when Willem Dafoe turns out to be a Huey Lewis and the News fan. He's like, oh, I don't like Huey Lewis. I don't like singers.
Yeah. Sounds well, and then that's not in the book, but he says he sounds too black.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah, that's a rough line. But then it's like he can't have like that individual like taste and everything, but then also he's not even true to his own individual taste, because he's like talking about like, oh, it's like so beautiful, like listening about like monogamy and stuff like that, but then like it will be like a hard cut to like him having like just like this very like rough looking sex and everything. It's like it's just like, oh, this guy's completely full of shit, like he can't even be true to himself in his own way.
But yeah, like that is either my favorite scene or I mean, I guess it would be the business card scene, but I feel like that's no, fuck that. I'll say the Paul Allen scene, but I'll say my favorite line is the murders and executions being mistaken for mergers and acquisitions. That's just brilliant.
Yeah. I think every time he gets insulted to his face, like saying like Bateman is such a dork, and he just like winces, like trying not to react. It's so funny. But yeah, like the little like swish noises when they open the business cards and like the ambient music rising up, just like the way they play it up as if it's like a legitimate horror movie moment. It's like the incongruity of that is so funny, I think. Yeah.
Kate, do you have a favorite scene?
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys have mentioned a bunch of spectacular scenes. I think honestly one of my favorite, and this one would probably be when he, like after he goes on his murder spree and he's hiding from the helicopter and he calls his lawyer to confess, and he's just like losing his mind, and that's like my favorite quote that he has is, "I've killed a lot of people." And it's just the way he delivers it.
I think I remember that from the trailer. I feel like that stayed with me until I watched the movie. But yeah, it's just so good. And then the scene after that where they're watching Reagan and just like dressing him down and whatnot, but then you're doing exactly what Reagan's talking about, but whatever. And just how many times he keeps stopping his lawyer to be like, no, please listen, no, please, like 5 times, to the point where he's just like, this isn't funny, and I also don't know who you are, and I also had dinner with Paul Allen, what are you talking about? And it's just like, you can't win. And then of course the shot with when it's going to his head and the sign says this is not an exit, and that's the last line of the book, is it's just so good. He's perpetually, it's just like, you can't, it's just like, it's the movie's not wanting to make you feel bad for him, because he already feels way worse than you would ever feel bad for him. So that's what I like about it. It's very, with Easton's books that I've read so far, it's very, very complicated, all of his characters, and I would much rather that than somebody that I can label one way or the other. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and this is like one of Bale's best performances. I mean, like it's really
best.
It's so good. I mean, like yeah, the way he like just like talks about, like, I mean, like just like the movements where he is like a motivational speaker and everything, when he's like, like pointing at people, like when he's like talking and everything, it's like so rigid and robotic and everything. Like he tries to make everything look so relaxed, but like when he's just crossing his legs, it looks like you're just trying so hard for like the simplest thing. And
he's trying to fit in.
Exactly. Yes. It's so perfect. Yeah.
I guess I'm getting off of the favorite scene thing. Well, but because we were talking about Christian Bale now, I really have had a hard time with Christian Bale over the past few years.
Most people have, yeah.
Like, I feel like he's taken acting as like the ways in which he's like, I'm acting with my weight, I find to be very kind of troubling. Like,
Right.
I know this is a very snide joke, but I feel like I've had an eating disorder with Christian Bale for the like in the checkout aisle of every grocery store for the past 10 years, where it's like, look how much weight he gained to play Dick Cheney. It's like, all right, that's not acting. That's just, that's just weight gain. But like you mentioned movies that he was in, like he was really killing it. I mean, I hadn't seen Empire of the Sun until like a couple of years ago. He's incredible in that film as just a kid. He's great in Velvet Goldmine. I think he's a wonderful Laurie in Little Women. This, I think it's so brave of him. And even though he's doing all the Christian Bale stuff that usually annoys me now, just knowing that he wasn't that famous, it's such an audaciously courageous thing to do when you're not a star yet and you're basically just been a child star, and to throw yourself into such a despicable, disgusting character like this and give it your all. I still, as much as I've been annoyed by his very look at me overacting over the past few years, I still think this is an incredible performance from him. In terms of favorite scenes, there's so many, but I will say, because we've been talking a lot about the fact that Bateman is an awful misogynist. Two scenes that I think are very funny and that I love that Guinevere Turner and Mary Harron wrote is the two female characters who are also suffering from the same sort of narcissistic tendencies as the men. Like, I think Guinevere Turner, I didn't know who Guinevere Turner was when I first watched it. I didn't know that she was very much a very outspoken queer artist who helped create the L Word and was the love interest in the Watermelon Woman. And didn't she help create the L Word? Am I wrong about that?
No, I wasn't questioning that. I was like, that's interesting. That's cool.
And she wrote, I haven't seen this movie and it's been on my list for years, but she also wrote and produced and starred in a film called Go Fish, which is apparently a very great queer a great queer film. So to see her now in this scene where she's playing someone who's just as self-centered and just as in her mindset as the other characters proves to me that she has a great sense of humor about herself. That scene where it cuts to Patrick just clearly drugging the wine and she's just yapping and not paying attention to what's clearly going on, and Chrissy is clearly paying attention to what's going on because she's not drinking it, but she's just yapping, and then she's like, I'm gonna call my coke dealer, and Patrick's like, no, please don't bother him, it's like 3 a.m, and the main reason being, I'm gonna fucking kill you, please don't make contact with the outside world. And she's like, oh come on, it's 3 a.m, those are his peak hours. And she takes a sip of wine and goes, this tastes weird. Hi, I was wondering if you have any coke. Like, I just thought that was so funny. And also Reese Witherspoon being just as self-absorbed and completely oblivious to the outside world. The scene where he breaks up with her, I found to be so funny, where he's literally drawing the chainsaw murder in crayon. She's not paying attention to it at all. And he's just like, I think we should call off the engagement. And she's like, but my friends are your friends and your friends are my friends. I just don't see it happening. And he's like, I know that my friends are your friends. You can have them. And she's like, oh my God, you're serious? Yeah. What about our past? Never really had one, which we never see anyway. And then he just goes, look, I'm sorry, but you're not terribly important to me. And she just starts crying. It's so mean, but it is so funny because she's a horrible person too. She doesn't kill people like he doesn't, but she's very much in her own rich white person mindset that I found to be very effective, where I found that stuff to be, I'm glad that Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner wrote a couple of female characters that are just as much suffering from this form of just narcissism as the male characters, in order to make it a more believable satire. Because I do think the scene with Chloe Sevigny is so heartbreaking, in that she's the only person who actually asks how he's doing and cares about other people. And obviously the stuff with Chrissy is the toughest to watch because she's so smart and is treated so horribly by Patrick as a sex worker for, and the scene with the homeless person preceding that provides just how he feels about people who are lower than him in terms of class and stature and stuff like that, and women as objects. So that was the stuff that kind of heightened everything for me this time around, if that makes any sense.
Totally. The breakup scene, actually, that might be one of my favorite scenes in the movie, because it is just like so funny. One, how he talks about it like he is a business deal. It's a business deal where he's like, I've assessed the situation and I'm leaving.
I've assessed the situation.
and also like where it's like him having to deal with a human emotion like her being upset is like that's like something that scares him, where he's like, I can't deal with this. I'm gonna just leave the situation. He can't do anything about it because he's like in a public place and everything. But it's so funny.
I do love the line of, I need to engage in homicide on a massive scale, and she just doesn't hear him.
Yeah, I mean that's what's fascinating too, is like watching how like it's like simple shot reverse shot, but like how like a lot of conversations are decentered and everything, where like they're not like, it'll be like Bale will be on like the left side of a frame, and like if he's like talking to someone like Willem Dafoe, they'll be like not even in the same shot with him, but also like kind of like off to the right and everything, where it doesn't look like it's like showing it's so off kilter and anything, where it's like people are talking to each other, they're not hearing what they're saying though, like they're all just like caught up in their own shit. I mean that's like with the mergers and acquisitions, murders and executions thing. It's just like it doesn't matter, everything they're saying is arbitrary because no one's making any connections here.
I do like his line reading of, I know my behavior could be a bit erratic. Any final thoughts on American Psycho before we wrap up?
Well, it's one of those movies that can withstand the test of time, really. So it's worth watch now. I'm interested to see what we will think in another 20 years. you know?
Yeah. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Almost Major. Please rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Please follow the pod on Twitter at Almost Major to keep up to date with what movies we will be covering in the future. Myself, I can be found on Twitter and Letterboxd at Kev Bonesy. Bryden can be found on Twitter at Bryden Doyle and on Letterboxd at J Doyle. Charlie can be found on Twitter and Letterboxd at CT Nash91. Once again, thank you for listening.